Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. Today we're turning our attention to the light cavalry of the Empire of Man and asking the question, is it actually any good? So when we look at the available army list, there's currently two types of cavalry available which can be used to fulfill the function of light horse. We've got the Pistoliers and we've got the Outriders. Now, the Outriders, I think it is debatable as to whether they're truly light cavalry or not. They might be pushing into what we will perhaps more realistically call medium cavalry. But they do have the fast cavalry, so we're including them for the purposes of this, and also because it gives us an element of choice. Now, the Empire doesn't have its Arcane Journal yet. We don't know when that's coming out, and that may well make some changes to available army lists going forward. But at the moment, we're working purely with what we've got in the Forces of Fantasy book. So firstly, let's have a look at what is the role of light cavalry on the Warhammer battlefield. Well, I think this is probably an evolving situation given the game's still relatively new. But if we look back at how light cavalry have been used across Warhammer Fantasy Battles and my own experiences as well of games of Warhammer Old World, I think there's probably four key areas where we're starting to look at. First of these is the classic War Machine and lone character hunting. So if someone for some reason puts a level 4 wizard by its lonesome, that's a really good target for a small unit of light cavalry to go in and ruin their day. Getting around flanks and into war machines is a really helpful way of keeping them occupied and not shooting at things you don't want them shooting at, and also for picking up a fair amount of points in an easy bite-sized chunk. The second way of using them is chaff clearance. It's getting rid of your opponent's light cavalry, which are trying to disrupt your own battle lines. Which brings us on to protecting that main battle line, whether it be redirecting enemy charges, getting in the way and blocking enemy units and stopping them from moving effectively, or utilising fire and flee mechanics in order to whittle people down as they come forward. Finally, I've noted rank and flank pressure. So if you can clear enemy chaff units, this gives you the opportunity to pick up maybe convenient flank charges, etc., disrupt ranks and try and turn that combat resolution into your own advantage. This isn't a great role for a lot of light cavalry. They'll have to pick their combats carefully because they do tend to go down relatively quickly, not particularly well armoured. So for the Empire, heavy armour is all you get, so 5-up save. Combined with toughness 3, that's something that is easily gotten rid of, so there is a risk you're just giving combat resolution points to your opponent as opposed to taking away. So with that said, let's have a look at the two options, Pistoliers and Outriders. Starting with the Pistoliers, what do we notice? Well, there's been a bit of commentary around Pistoliers on the internet. You've probably seen it, where they've pretty much been written off as a useful unit. And looking at their stats, they are absolutely bang average. Standard, typical baseline human, 3's pretty much across the chart. Leadership's not particularly good, so they're not going to be hitting a lot at the time. The only advantage they've got is the horse being relatively quick. If we look at their weapon, the pistol's only got a 12-inch range. Now, yes, it's strength 4. Yes, it can do damage if it hits, but if you're moving around, you're likely to be firing at long range because of the short range of the weapon. There's a lot of negatives starting to pile on something that only hits on a 4-up before any modifiers are applied. So that's not fantastic as an option. Pistoliers do have the choice of being open order or skirmish, however, so you've got a bit of flexibility as to how you use them. Whether you want them a bit more dispersed to keep them in a firefight for longer, or whether you want to keep them in open order so that they suddenly have ranks and flanks of their own and can be used for redirecting enemy units a bit more effectively. There is some choice there. I do note, quite interestingly, I think, that Pistoliers have countercharge. Now, I think this is quite relevant to the lore. Pistoliers are people trying to prove themselves, get into the ranks of knighthood and stuff like that. So they would be willing to engage if charged. But these figures, these models, they're not great fighters. As I say, the stats are 3 across the board. They've only got heavy armour. They've not got particularly... Well, they've just got hand weapons and pistols. There's nothing special about their close combat abilities. I think fire and flee rule is going to be more useful for them, being able to let off a volley of shots and then try and get out of the way. And this, I think, leads us to the biggest weakness of the Pistoliers. They're impetuous. Yes, this goes really nicely with the lore. These are much like the Knights Errant of Bretonnia. They are young men. They're desperate to prove themselves. They will take unnecessary risks. But on the Warhammer battlefield, do you really want your light cav throwing themselves away in a charge which they are doomed to get destroyed? Not particularly useful. And it really runs a risk that their tactical benefits of being there, being able to redirect stuff, block stuff, all that sort of good things, is going to get thrown away when they just launch themselves at a ranked up unit of heavy infantry or a unit of knights, something like that, and get absolutely taken apart. Having to take steps to try and make it so it's not possible for your Pistoliers to charge things you don't want to charge is a layer of complexity you just don't need in your battle plan, and I think rather defeats the point of them being there. So yes, I fully understand that I think Pistoliers are not going to be making anyone's list anytime soon. Unless, of course, it's purely there from a fluff perspective. That brings us on to the Outriders. And I think these are a bit odd when it comes to light cavalry, because yes, they are fast cav, but they're armed with a weapon which is cumbersome, which means if they start moving around, their effectiveness with their weapon is massively impaired. But we'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a second. Let's start by looking at the stats. Outriders have a standard ballistic skill of 4, meaning before any modifiers are applied from their weapons, range, etc., when they're shooting, they're hitting on a 3. The unit champion has a ballistic skill of 5, hitting on a 2 before modifiers. And this actually suddenly starts to become really helpful. They're a good, solid shooting unit and can provide a level of accuracy most humans can only dream of. Now, they're not good fighters. They're weapon skill 3, strength 3, heavy armor, toughness 3. They're not going to survive a prolonged engagement with anything other than really enemy skirmishes any time soon. So really, this is a unit that's all about the shooting opportunities. Now, I mentioned the lack of mobility, which kind of throws in the face of the role of light cavalry. Yes, they can be used in this way if you need them to, but really, chaff clearance, wearing down enemy units, providing pressure through firepower is what their game is all about. Now, the repeater handgun, I do think, is actually a really interesting weapon. 3 shots each. Yes, it's cumbersome, so if they move, a -2 penalty to hit. But they are putting an awful lot of shots downrange. Vanguard is a really useful rule for Outriders as well. It allows them that pre-game move, so that turn 1, you can pretty much guarantee to be in range of something that you want to shoot at, without then suffering that -2 movement penalty. Yes, you've got -1 long range, you've got -1 multi-shots, but you're now hitting on 5s, and as things get closer, that's going to become 4s very quickly. The guns themselves being strength 4, AP 1, armor bane 1, this all really allows them to start getting through armor and do some pretty tasty damage. Like the Pistoliers, they have the option of being skirmishers or open order cavalry. I've personally been using them as open order cavalry because this gives me an option of actually having fronts and flanks and stuff, and being able to then, if necessary, just put them in the way of something to try and attempt to redirect in a way that charging skirmishers doesn't. And I know they've also got the fire and flee rule. Now, this is something I've not actually used yet, but is probably a rule I really do need to remember, because I think it's going to be quite useful. That last fusil of shots blazing away before retiring is going to be quite useful. They're not necessarily cheap at 19 points per model with an extra 6 for a unit champion, but I've found they definitely do some work. And I think a prime example of this is actually a game against some Bretonnians. Now, admittedly, the dice were slightly in my favour. I got a little bit lucky with the rolls, but turn 1, a unit without a champion, actually. So it was just 5 normal dudes, so 15 shots at BS4, blazed away at a unit of Knights of the Realm. There were 6 knights in the unit, 2 of them fell, and the rest of them fled from the field before they'd even had a chance to start moving. This completely changed the landscape of the battle. In other games, I've also found that, particularly against actually dwarves, they've been quite effective because as forces have trudged towards each other. Bear in mind, I think Empire's very much a counter-punch army, so it's not one way you're going to be flying forward to engage. You're kind of trying to bring enemy on to you into traps, wearing them down with gunfire. That seems to be the way I've seen most success with them. They're offering a lot of value to that shooting line and wearing enemy units down. So overall, yeah, I'd say Outriders, they've got the capacity to do some really good work. They can fall over fairly quickly if targeted, something to bear in mind, but overall I do quite like them, and there's definitely a unit or 2 in most of the lists that I'm building. But that's just perhaps my thoughts and experiences with the Empire Light Cavalry. Have you been able to find other uses for them? Have you managed to get Pistoliers to work, or have you also been put off by their very mediocre stats and poor combination of special rules? Do let me know down in the comments below. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening to my thoughts on this topic. If you've enjoyed this video and others like it, perhaps the video on the veteran state troopers, for example, do consider subscribing. It is the best way of helping a small channel such as this, along with giving a few minutes of your time to listen to my thoughts. Once again, thank you very much for listening. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.